We are now joined by Dan Perry, the former editor-in-chief of the Associate Press's Europe, West Asia and Africa region, joining us now live in Tel Aviv. Dan, always a pleasure to have you with us. Thanks very much for joining us today. Now, we are discussing an announcement from Qatar's foreign ministry that says negotiations between Oman and Iran regarding the Strait of Hormuz have reached a critical stage. Now, we are looking at several factors interplaying here. Of course, Qatar has a vested interest in shipping returning through the Strait of Hormuz. However, it does look like Iran may put some sort of toll fee in place. Talk us through some of the interested parties here and how Qatar may be hoping this situation to finalize itself.
Well, everyone's hoping that the strait will open, including probably Iran, if they can get what they want, which is the shakedown fee that they want to charge, and that I think they're trying to recruit Oman to join them in. And it'll be very interesting to see if Oman, historically in recent years and decades, has been a fairly good partner for the West and for the Arab League, will agree to take part in this blackmail. I would have trouble seeing it, and yet the Omanis haven't denied what the Iranians have been suggesting, which is that the deal that they're working out with Oman would include a demand for fees that are defined not as tolls but as service fees for basically protection of the ships. So it kind of is a mafia-like proposition. And the real question right now is whether Qatar and the other interested parties that you mentioned, like Bahrain, like the UAE, like Saudi Arabia, would agree to contemplate such a thing. And who knows, maybe they would. I mean, in theory, they might sort of consider their options and agree. For the US and for the West, there are larger issues at stake, because if the principle that just because you can fire at ships going through a narrow maritime waterway that you don't actually have the right to block under international law and precedent, the idea that that can just be violated is terrible as a precedent that could inspire copycats. And we'd be looking at the Taiwan Strait, the Malacca Strait, various other alternative straits going through parts of Indonesia and the Pacific environs. The Bab el-Mandeb, of course. I mean, at that point, who knows? Maybe Somalia wants to charge. Maybe the Houthis. Maybe they recognize the Yemen government, and there's no end to it. And so America, I think, can't agree to this. And America's allies, who for the past 6 months or more have been flirting with, peevishness because they're angry at Trump being so absurd, and threatening Denmark, which by means of refusing to rule out forced to seize Greenland. And in general, Trump's brutalizing of them with tariffs and with insults and claims that they're abandoning their own civilization. They haven't been on side, but they have the same interest in not allowing the international superstructure of maritime trade to be vandalized this way by Iran, and who knows, maybe by Oman. Again, hard as it may be to believe. So that's where we are. Qatar's seeming sanguinity about all this right now bodes ill for the idea that they would stand firm in refusing to pay the blackmail fees.
Now, Dan, you did mention the prospects from the US of agreeing to this new plan may be quite small. There's been recent comments from the US President Donald Trump, who has said that Iran should pay reparations for past conflicts. Do you think these comments will affect the negotiations, if at all?
No. Those comments are meant to sort of neutralize Iran's request for reparations that it should receive. That was always the kind of thing that could be satisfied indirectly and deniably. For example, if the US really went through with a $300 billion investment encouragement package, the Iranians would have presented that as reparations. But I think no one's actually getting reparations formally. And as I say so often on your show, I mean, Trump declaring something, that and $7 in New York these days will get you a cup of coffee. I mean, he declares everything and turns on a dime. But it strongly suggests that it's the U.S. attempt to reject the Iranian notion that they should get reparations. Not much more than that.
Dan, there's also been comments from Al Ansari welcoming cooperative defensive frameworks centered on good neighborliness. Do you think that these comments are reflective of the recent defense pact that's been signed between Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Pakistan?
They appear to be, although who knows? I mean, just looking at the words, it could refer to anything, including defense agreements with the United States. Maybe he's referring to America's potential nuclear cooperation pact with Saudi Arabia. But he does appear to be referencing that, and that tripartite pact, much as it may be disturbing to others, is somewhat aligned with the basic modus operandi of Qatar that attempts to be okay with everyone and at least pretend to be neutral. So, you know, they host the largest U.S. base in the region. At the same time, they further the interests of the Muslim Brotherhood and have been close to Iran as well, until Iran recently began attacking them too. So, yeah, I mean, I think all this is posturing in the aid of trying to figure out what the Pakistan-Saudi-Turkey deal really means. And I would suggest to you it doesn't have to mean all that much declaratively. It's huge. And depending what they do with it, yeah, it could be significant if they start doing joint maneuvers in the Indian Ocean. But in fact, even though it has some equivalent of NATO's Article 5, NATO's Article 5 doesn't really obligate every other member to do very much. It says an attack on one is an attack by all, but it doesn't then say what they have to do. They don't have to go to war with the attacker. They have to do whatever is deemed appropriate and necessary by each country. So NATO is a political, more than legalistic grouping, and this could be the same. It could largely be a declaration that they intend to work together. And it's extremely unclear where it goes when one of the countries is Pakistan, that purportedly is a U.S. ally, but that harbored bin Laden and that played games with the Taliban for the past 30 years. Another one of the countries is Turkey, who is a NATO member, so potentially a rival alliance where Turkey's fighting itself one day. But on the other hand, NATO member or not, they have NATO Ottoman aspirations and potential aggression that they're projecting across the region. So this is a situation where we have to wait and see.
Dan, stay with us. I'm coming back to you very shortly. Lebanon's President Joseph Aoun says negotiations with Israel are making progress, even as Israeli attacks on Lebanon continue. Aoun says talks remain preferable to what he described as the consequences of a destructive war. According to the Lebanese presidency, Aoun says the scale of Israeli attacks has been contained following the signing of a framework for negotiations. He says Lebanon remains focused on three key goals: an Israeli withdrawal, the return of prisoners, and the reconstruction of areas damaged by the conflict. Aoun also makes clear that Lebanon will not accept any continued Israeli military presence on its territory. He says no Israeli soldier will be allowed to remain on Lebanese soil. Aoun also argues that developments on the ground have shown that force is not the only way to recover territory. He calls for people in southern Lebanon to be able to live on their land without further wars. The Lebanese president also says his priority is rebuilding the state, despite opposition from those he accuses of seeking to undermine institutions. Coming back to you, Dan, thanks very much for staying with us. Now, comments from Joseph Aoun, the Lebanese president. He said that negotiations with Israel are making progress, and these negotiations are very unusual for the fact that Lebanon and Israel have had very poor relations for many decades now. How have you analysed the situation between Lebanon and Israel? Do you think that the Lebanese state can effectively take back sovereignty of their own territory?
Lebanese state is challenged when it comes to sovereignty in two different ways. One, sure, Israel marches in and out as it wishes, and that's obviously disrespectful of Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. On the other hand, I say a bigger problem for Lebanon is that it hosts Hezbollah, that essentially controls the government and is a proxy of Iran and does what he wants with the entirety of the territory. And Israel's incursions into Lebanon, I do believe, are exclusively in order to push back Hezbollah, to protect itself against Hezbollah, and when they lose patience, to attempt to destroy Hezbollah. Israel has no enmity that I can identify towards the Lebanese state. It's purely a question of Hezbollah. That is the be-all and end-all of everything involving Lebanon as far as Israel is concerned. Now, what about how Lebanon is concerned? Lebanon is a quite divided country ethnically, and Israel has, in fact, had quite good relations with the ethnic group that was once dominant and has now been reduced to about a third of the country, which is Maronite and other Christians. And that is the group that President Joseph Aoun represents. So it's no big surprise that he's kind of friendly towards Israel. And Israel is extremely friendly towards him. That's actually not new. What's new is that he's willing to be open about it, and that he and his Muslim prime minister, Nawaf Salam, have been willing to state that their goal is a peace treaty with Israel. Now, that's pretty big, that's pretty brave, and it creates a sort of a PR challenge for Israel, because on the one hand, they have to reach out to the outstretched hand, and it would be so unsporting of Israel not to pull out of the buffer zone it currently controls in Lebanon, because these guys want peace. But on the other hand, they're extremely skeptical that despite the good wishes and despite the fancy talk, the government of Lebanon can actually disarm Hezbollah, as they've promised to do and agreed to do, and as the UN Security Council, two UN Security Councils from back in the 2000s actually demand. So everyone agrees Hezbollah's got to be disarmed. If they were disarmed, it would be, a job done and game over and problem solved. But who's going to disarm Hezbollah is not so clear. So whatever Joseph Aoun says, most of it is wonderful. What Israel does with that, they're on their back foot trying to figure out how not to take more hits in global public opinion. But they really can't pull out of Lebanon, the buffer zone they hold in Lebanon, until Hezbollah is disarmed. They can't. And if the world cares, and here we are in a show from India, and India seems to care, whoever cares needs to help Lebanon and help Joseph Aoun disarm Hezbollah. I can't think of anything else to say about this issue, and one grows tired of repeating it. And of course, now we have Iran being humored in its pretense that this is somehow their business, that they have the interests of Lebanese sovereignty at heart because they would like Hezbollah to not be harmed. Hezbollah is an extension of the Iranian mafia undermining Lebanon. So Iran should be pushed aside from this entire thing, and the world should help Lebanon disarm Hezbollah, which is possible, because they no longer have a weapons superhighway from Iran through Syria, because Syria is now ruled by the enemies of Hezbollah. They're surrounded, and they can be defeated.
Dan, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining us on NewsX World.